Welcome, everyone. I'm Chris Emanuel. I'm the President and CEO of the Central York Chamber of Commerce. And today, we've got a really great opportunity here from a subject matter expert in the world of talent and culture. We're going to be specifically discussing employee engagement and retention and how best to keep and attract employees. And so we've got one of our community's leaders in this field, Sarah Bossuyt, and she's the manager of talent and culture at Treefrog Inc. She's a certified human resource professional, and she has more than 7 years of experience in people and talent and culture. And I have to say, I've had the pleasure of working with Sarah a number of times over the years, and I've learned so much from her, and she's just such a great asset to the HR world. And so, Sarah, we'll let you take it from here, and really look forward to learning from you today.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so everyone can see what we're talking about today. So with that, I will continue talking as if everyone can see, but let me know if it's not up. Today, I'm here to talk a little bit about employee attraction and retention, what your employees wish you knew. Really interesting topic. We've seen a lot of really interesting new trends come out, especially post-pandemic. So we're talking 2023 into what is now 2024 this year. So today's conversation, we're going to talk about 3 major trends. There's so many out there, but I figured I'd pick 3 ones that are kind of moving around and really interesting to right now. The first one, of course, work environment, where people are working, the big conversation in today's work era. We'll, of course, get into that. We'll talk about AI at work. Really important. Some early data is coming out, some studies that are showing where it's related to employees using AI, productivity. Of course, there's still fear. So we'll talk a little bit about those pieces. And then last but not least, personalized culture. So probably heard a lot about culture over the last few years, but really getting into what it means to have individualism within your organization and kind of go from there. With that, let's hop right into the remote work environment, the hybrid work environment, in person. Depending on the type of organization that you're in, the work may demand where you all work. Manufacturing, retail, got to be in person. Of course, that makes sense, but others may have, remote or kind of heading out of remote fully and into more hybrid. What does this mean? All of these areas have pros, they have challenges, they have, areas to focus on, and what employees are looking for depending on the type of work environment that you have. So we'll go through all 3 today. Let's start with remote. If you started remote back in 2020 and have still been there, we are heading into year number 4 of people being 100% remote. That is pretty crazy. 4 years of fully being either in a home or a coffee shop or wherever that may be. And remote work is really interesting because remote work in itself can be a number of things. You can not have any brick and mortar location. Maybe you're 100% remote. Maybe you're spread across the country, across the globe. Maybe you're remote first. So very similar to Treefrog, we get together, once a month to collaborate, to have interesting conversations. But for the most part, everyone can kind of choose where they work. Maybe you have some roles that are 100% remote and some that are 100% in person. Even within these categories, there's so many different options. But there's really 4 areas in remote work we're going to talk about and what we're seeing employees talk about. The first and foremost one is systems of collaboration. So if you think about that, a lot of times you'll likely think of things like Slack, Teams, so those enterprise systems that we saw come out actually prior to COVID, but really kind of started making their way into kind of the norm of companies through 2020 and 2021. Now, it's not necessarily just about having systems, and some of these systems are expensive, but it could be anything for collaboration. It can be a WhatsApp group. It can be a type of meeting that you have Mondays at 9 a.m. where you simply get everybody together to talk about challenges. It doesn't necessarily need to be a system that you purchase and have on a laptop. It can be any type of system that the company puts in play to ensure that collaboration happens while remote. One question we're really seeing from employees that are moving from one role into another, one organization, is they're asking that question. What type of collaboration tools do you have, and how can we know that we'll be collaborating throughout the day? I think of sales teams that maybe aren't necessarily doing the work but are supporting. A lot of that collaboration is going to be helpful for them. That goes into communication and expectations as well. From a communication perspective, there's a few things for remote work. One is, what type of communication? Do you want them online and available between 9 and 5? Do you have, specific hours like 10 to 3 and you can kind of be more flexible? Those questions are coming up a lot because, again, when we talk about remote work, it's so different for every organization. So setting those expectations is going to be really important to your current employees if you haven't set those already. But even more so, employees that are coming into 100% remote environments are going to be asking, well, what does remote mean to this organization? Maybe it's that you don't mind if somebody, goes to the grocery store or needs to do things after 3 o'clock, but 10 to 3 is really where you need everybody to be on call 100% at their desk. So there's different variations, and making sure that those expectations are set to both the incoming employees and the current is really going to help foster that equity, especially when things like, accommodations might come up or specific needs. That will be really helpful. And then last but not least is location. We already talked about what the heck does, remote really mean. But I think even more than that, we're starting to see the questions come out, especially after COVID, where everyone was kind of stuck in their homes. We couldn't really leave. Now we're starting to see, remote at one company might be they spend 4 months in Mexico a year, whereas the other one might be you want them remote, but in Ontario. So again, coming back to expectations, locations becoming a large topic as remote becomes very specialized to that organization. It isn't a broader umbrella anymore. So when it comes to remote work, I think it's really important to ensure that we're talking about what the expectations are behind that meeting. Now let's swing to the opposite end of the spectrum and talk about 100% remote or in-person work, sorry. In person, one thing that I think is really important and is often missed when talking about in-person work is, if you are 100% in person, you really can use culture a bit more to your advantage than maybe some of these remote teams. You have the ability to see everybody as they come into the office, and that allows you to kind of see faces, have conversations. That collaboration is a little bit more inherent to the day-to-day. One thing I would definitely state here when I mention culture is you have the ability as an in-person organization to create small traditions. And I don't mean spend a ton of money on things that, your employees really want, but that one birthday cake you get at the end of the month for all the birthdays or all the work anniversaries in that month is going to be really important. Starting small traditions that have a cadence that people can get used to makes people excited for them. It's one really big important piece of in-work collaboration that some of those remote teams don't necessarily have the option to have. So definitely use that to your advantage. When it comes to flexibility, in person is a little bit more difficult because typically when we're in person, there's a main reason for it, right? If you have an employee that needs to, ensure that a retail location is open from 9 to 5, you don't have those options of kind of having them leave at 4:30. But I encourage you all to think outside the box. We're seeing that quite a bit more when it comes to individuals that are working in these types of sectors that are primarily in person. Your employees and new employees coming in, they know they have to work in person. It's not lost on them that they can't work remotely when they need to be either watching a door, watching a store, manufacturing a line. They understand that. What they're looking for, though, is how can we think outside the box if certain aspects come in? Think about maybe work share. Maybe you have an employee that was always able to be in, but they can only work part-time. Are we able to find another part-time employee? I really think the idea of getting outside of the traditional kind of 9 to 5 or whatever hours and everything being exactly like it has been traditionally is kind of going out the door. We're seeing a new wave of interesting ideas and thinking outside the box to be really situational with people. And then I come to the non-working hours at work. This one's always tough because obviously for a small half an hour, in between an 8-hour shift, there may not be the comforts of home, if you will. But again, we go back to those small changes. As an in-person employer, if we can have, a coffee machine or things like that, small little availabilities that we have for these employees to feel a bit more at home, to be a bit more comfortable, that's going to go a long way. It's also going to become something that you can state to new candidates that are looking to come into your organization as pros. Why should they join your organization? I remember once I worked with one that after years of working there, they finally had a little outdoor patio, and the difference between working inside and eating lunch and having those summer days where you could go outside for 30 minutes and eat was life-changing. So keep in mind, it doesn't need to be big. I know that's a big cost one, but anything will do. Try to think about what could be really interesting for them and make those, breaks, those half hours at work a little bit more enjoyable. Then we come to hybrid. This is going to be a mix of the two. So you can kind of take pieces from the remote. You can kind of take pieces from, a little bit more of the in-person and mesh them together. Kind of a fun way to look at the work environment here as well. But there's 3 areas that I think are particularly unique to hybrid work. The first one is commute worthy. I like this kind of saying, but really what it means is if you're a type of organization that has the ability to work 100% remote, but leadership or the company as general said, 2 days a week, it really makes sense to come in and to collaborate or to come in for X reason, then what we're seeing is employees want to see that happening. Let's say we come in together on Tuesdays and Thursdays because we really wanted to create a collaborative work environment. What employees are looking for is how are we as a leadership team, how is the organization going to set up for that collaboration? Maybe it's that meeting. Maybe it's what we talked about when it comes to the systems and the remote area where we have a time we can come together and talk. What does collaboration in person look like? So it's kind of, it's walking the talk, if you will, when it comes to bringing people back into the office. Accommodations and flexibility. This is where we're going to take a bit of a personalized approach, both to that and physical space. We actually have been seeing over the last few years that hybrid workers are the least likely to have properly set up at home spaces. Why that is a lot of times if you have a nice office, has an ergonomic desk, has an ergonomic chair, employees will of course know that they have a beautiful setup at the office, and then the 2 days they're home, they'll work wherever. That might be the countertop, that might be a couch. So we're starting to see some concerns coming out of that. Obviously, we want our employees to be happy and healthy, and that means the right desk. So having that conversation up front, what does that look like? What does taking one setup and moving it to another setup look like? Some of these things are areas that are easy to forget as organizations, but we're seeing a lot more questions come in from candidates, especially as they've experienced it one way in an organization and are looking what it looks like into another. And also retention. If you've been hybrid for the last few years, got people back in as quickly as possible, for the longevity of people's, mental health, their eyesight, their, backs from a chair perspective, it's always good to think about what does kind of mirroring and what does having 2 actual spaces look like, and how can we help our employees make sure that their well-being, especially physical when it comes to kind of the ergonomics of it, is being looked after. And then when it comes to accommodations, typically when it's hybrid, we have, the ability to be a little bit more flexible. But again, when it comes to accommodations, I want to talk about equity and not equality. If we have everybody coming in on certain schedules, can we make it so that individuals that maybe need childcare or elder care have a little bit of leeway? Or, when I say leeway, I don't mean that they're getting out of something, but more how can we tailor it to be, right for them in their situation? As we saw it, a lot of women really benefited from working from home, especially when it came to childcare or elder care responsibilities. So how can we bring that equity? How can we help some of those accommodations in the hybrid workplace? Just some things to think about for this. We'll head over to AI at work. New topic. This is scary for some, exciting for others, and no matter where you fall on that spectrum of if you really think that AI is going to be helpful in your organization, or if you're a little bit nervous to use it, I don't think we can say it's not coming on, strong and hard here, especially in Canada. Gemini, which is Google's AI, or GAI, which is generative AI, just came out last week. So it doesn't seem like there's any stopping to this AI trend coming into the workplace. Now, I do think when we talk about fear, when we talk about change of any sort, I always suggest taking a look at your past and thinking about a story that will help you convey a time that change wasn't scary. So for myself, I think about the time I was an intern. When I had my first internship years ago, I remember it, Thursdays was the day, I spent every hour, so 8 hours straight, filing physical pieces of paper into a filing cabinet. I cannot remember for the life of me why we had that much paper, but I did. That was one of my days of work. Moving over to my next role, we didn't have filing cabinets anymore. We stored everything electronically, but we still needed physical signatures. We didn't really have DocuSign yet. So we had to, send it off, print it out, sign it, scan it back in, send it, print it, give it to payroll. Lots of moving parts there, but we were at least able to house them there. So I didn't file, but I spent a lot of time scanning. Now, looking at today's work, I use DocuSign. I file everything in an HRIS system. I don't even have a printer in my office. So the changes that we can see for that at the time could have seen as scary, right? I could be sitting here thinking, what would I have done as an intern if I wasn't filing paperwork? But interns today in HR are configuring reports on HRIS systems. They're doing bigger, bigger picture thinking. So everything has worked out. These are incredibly smart interns coming out of school that are way more advanced on AI than I am. So trying to think about a personal story that you can chat with your employees about to just personalize the idea that AI isn't happening to them, it's happening, and we can kind of get on board. And it's a great way to get buy-in from some of those nervous employees. But let's talk about some of that first data I was mentioning. So here we have an MIT new study. It came out at the end of last year. So we're looking, towards the latter part of 2023. And it's a study from MIT who took roughly 450, I think it was just under, college-educated professionals. Some had used AI, some hadn't. But for the most part, they said they didn't use AI on a day-to-day basis. And they split that group in half, and they gave them two tasks. One half, they asked them to use ChatGPT. They said, please use ChatGPT and generative AI to assist in completing these tasks. And the other team, they just gave the tasks. They didn't say not to use it. They didn't say to use it. They just gave them the tasks. This is where the data becomes really interesting. Here on the graph, the green portion is what you can see as the treatment group. That's the group that was given ChatGPT to complete the tasks. They were asked questions after the tasks. Were you worried about replacement? The people that used ChatGPT were way more concerned about ChatGPT replacing them than the ones that hadn't used it. But that group was also excited, significantly more excited about enhancement, as well as overall optimism. And we can see, even here at Treefrog, we can see that initial kind of movement into AI is nerve-wracking. But if you're somebody that has used it, you know that it's not a replacement for humans. It lies, there's questionable things, it doesn't always understand the tone you're using. You need a person behind it to use it. But I do think it's starting to come out that we have data to say, there is worry, but there's also a lot of excitement. And once people start to use it, we do see this worried about replacement kind of start to go down. Once people understand it a little bit more, once that initial nervousness is overcome, they can really see that it's helpful and that we're seeing it actually up productivity. And productivity is a huge piece that I want to talk about next. Here's just a few headlines we've been seeing. The most recent one was this: Canada's low productivity is scary, but you have some from June of last year. Productivity, not just in Canada, but around the globe, is a bit of a paradox where it's starting to actually trend downwards. This is not something that we're used to. We're typically used to seeing productivity consistently rise, and we have been for the last few decades. In this same study that we looked at, the AI actually gave 37% productivity gain to that treatment group, which was really interesting. And they did it in two specific ways. One was it reduced the time they spent on the task. So, of course, this is talking about things like brainstorming with it or editing or writing, very computer-based tasks. But the second one was complements the worker's skills. I think this is really important when it talks about retention and it talks about the way in which people are using AI. Reason being is we have all of these individuals that have individual likes and dislikes. For example, I don't like editing. I'm not particularly good at it. AI is able to help with a lot of that, and they're able to get more joy and more satisfaction out of their work. So that's a really great way to think about retention as job satisfaction. I'm also starting to get a lot of questions from candidates coming in of, are you using AI? Can I use it? What does that look like in your organization? And so having a baseline to say, candidate X, yes, you can absolutely use it. This is why, this is how. That's going to be really important and really essential to some of these new individuals coming into your organizations. Even if you're, a type of company that maybe isn't on computers all day, I definitely challenge you if you have, say, a Monday morning meeting or a meeting throughout the day or a town hall every quarter. Use it as a group. Start getting people used to it because I don't think this is particularly going away. And even the interest of it may be something that kind of brings motivation to your teams. Last but not least, let's get into personalized culture. So, personalized culture is a very specific term, and I wouldn't have been able to get through this talk today without talking about quiet quitting. Of course, it's the best marketed HR term of the last decade, probably, but it really has a simple meaning. And quiet quitting, although is a new term, the actual definition behind it has been something that HR has been looking for data and getting research on for years and years. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then psychological safety. This is one of those new trends we're seeing. Never really heard the terminology prior to COVID, but with COVID and then a lot of the layoffs happening in the last few years, stability, psychological safety has really come into play more than it ever has. So when we talk about quiet quitting or we talk about anything engagement, that's really the underlying piece of quiet quitting. It's simply looking at employee engagement. So of course, if we have a big spectrum of happy to angry faces, as you see on the screen, highly engaged employees are the ones that have an excellent attitude. They go above and beyond, they're responsible and reliable, and they're typically open about their future with the company. You may have someone like this in mind. They're usually somebody you can pinpoint as being extra highly engaged. Continuing along, we have engaged individuals, which is great. Of course, it's a giant spectrum. And then I'm actually going to go all the way to the opposite side and talk about the actively disengaged individuals. They make it clear they typically don't want to be there. Another vocal group. They're undermining coworkers. They're vocal about what's wrong with situations, but they typically don't have solutions that are helpful to the team, and they're not going to be open to change. Somewhere between engaged and actively disengaged, you have quiet quitting, or just disengaged, as we used to call it in the HR realm. Really, this is people that are on the metaphorical fence. They can kind of sway either way. And with that, I want to bring up another study. So this is a study that came out last year from Gallup. Gallup is a polling company. They do consultations. They're a huge global company. And what they do is they looked at engagement percentages throughout the globe. So what you're looking at right here is a map of the world, with the darker colors being the more engaged countries as per their surveys, and the lighter countries, yes, those in Europe, that are less engaged. So really taking a quick look here at the United States and Canada, of course they do group us in together, but I think it's still good data. You're looking at 31% as engaged. So that's going to be your engaged, your highly engaged, your employers that are not really a flight risk. You're really happy that they're there. They're looking at their futures with the company. And on the opposite side, you have actively disengaged, 17% of people that are probably negative and vocal about not wanting to be there. But that 52%, that's where you get that quiet quitting, that not engaged. And that's really where, as leaders, as managers, we have the influence to be able to shift those individuals from not engaged to engaged. This is really the kind of the quiet quitting solution, if you will. And there's, of course, no definitive way to do that. I don't have a solution that I can write down and provide to you, but we have, Gallup did ask some additional questions that I think would be interesting to get into. So one of the questions that they asked after is, you could make one change at your current employer to make it a great place to work. What would it be? Before we even get to the answers that are listed here on the screen, I think it's important to note that over 90% of people had an answer, which means typically your employees know where their frustrations lie within the organization. If you don't already, having something such as an employee engagement survey, one-on-one conversations, even just to ask, hey, how's it going? What would you change if you were the leader of this organization? Or having a quarterly, semi-annually, anything type of kind of survey, whether it's anonymous or not, to get feedback is going to be important, because we're seeing that employees typically know what they're looking for and they know what they want, specifically from a retention perspective. Here we can see 41% answered that engagement or culture was what they would change. 28% was pay and benefits. Of course, that's always going to be included in these answers. And 16% is well-being. Well-being is a really broad term, but really what well-being was here was a little bit of work-life balance, a little bit of stability. So it was those two kind of combined. But always interesting to see that engagement and culture is typically number one. And for years, I've been looking at these types of surveys, whether it be Gallup or other companies. Pay is never the top slot. So good to know that there are things that don't necessarily need to cost your organization a ton of money, but can really go to kind of sway those not engaged individuals over to the engaged side. Now, what about candidates? What are they looking for when they move? So another question was asked to new job seekers, and they were asked what was most important to them when deciding whether to accept a job offer from a new employer. 61% said greater work-life balance and well-being. So again, we're looking at something that falls in that engagement and culture perspective. And then the next one there is greater stability and security at 53%. So these are two huge numbers of percentages of candidates looking to come over. The stability and security goes back to that psychological safety, which really just means they want to trust who they're working for. They want to see a good track record of, good culture, feeling that they can understand and trust. Transparency is all big in there as well. But we're seeing the data show exactly what we have known for some time, which is really that culture and the engagement of employees is going to be the largest factor of swaying those quiet quitters, if you will, into that engagement and retaining them as good employees. One thing when we talked about the different types of kind of culture and engagement is I want to bring up as a very last point something called servant leadership. Horrible name, I know, that needs a rebrand like the quiet quitting got. But the 4 elements of servant leadership are stewardship, which just means caring for, empathy, listening, and commitment. These all go back to psychological safety, because if we're able to personalize our type of leadership to the individual that we're speaking to, yes, I know this is easier said than done if you have 20 people that report to you instead of 2, but trying to find ways that they would like to be led or that they feel the most secure in being led. That can look like asking them, how would you like to receive feedback? Would you like it at a scheduled weekly meeting? Would you like it ad hoc after a conversation? And of course, this is going to, go to your preferences as well. But having that conversation, building that trust, building that psychological safety at the beginning of these conversations is going to be fantastic from a retention perspective. And then this is last but not least, the other question I'm getting the most when I see candidates. How do your managers manage? What is the leadership culture of the organization? This is not something that I would have received even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but interviews are becoming a two-way street more and more. You're being interviewed as the person that this individual may report to, just as you're interviewing them. So even if you're not sure what type of leader you are, start thinking about it, write it down, because not only is it going to help the individuals that are currently in your organization, but it's going to help find the right fit for your leadership style, the right fit for your organization, as we're seeing some of these new candidates become, more available on the job market. So last but not least, I just want to say thank you very much for listening. I know that was a very quick way to talk about 3 trends we're seeing heading into 2024. We talked about work environment, AI at work, and personalized culture. There's so much to unpack with that, but I hope you all learned something today. Thanks for listening.